Namaste. Under the series Magnificent Savitri, I am speaking about the human enigma in Savitri. To speak about anything to do with Savitri is a sadhana. Many of us have the practice of reading Savitri. So do I. To me, the experience is like dealing with fire of purification. The reading of Savitri illumines the dark corners of my being, helps me to clear my doubts, and makes me deal and understand the cause of the conflicts in my life. But I feel unworthy and audacious to want to speak or explain about any part of it. Savitri is the very consciousness of the Master and the Mother. Who are we to explain the meaning of its mantric poetry? To use a line from Savitri to describe the epic poem, translated the unthinkable into thought. At the same time, the experience of reading Savitri is so overwhelmingly blissful that one delights in wanting to share the thoughts and feelings that arise in us. There are innumerable aspects of Savitri that one can speak about. I would like to share my thoughts on the aspect of the human enigma, the situation that man finds himself in this life, as this I find very interesting and intriguing. It is also of great relevance to us. As I mentioned earlier, the reading of Savitri identifies human failings and unknots the problems faced by the individual. Sri Aurobindo is a master psychologist describing all the intricacies of the human predicament. It is fascinating how he mirrors our quandary perfectly and articulates our hardships with such clarity that it becomes a catharsis for us while reading, as it lends a voice to our difficulties. I have absolutely no authority, nor do I claim to have understood Savitri in any of its dimensions. What I intend to do is simply to share some of the lines that describe the dilemma or impasse that man is trapped into and to discourse on them. I picked a few jewels from the immense treasure book, Savitri, and attempted to string them into a necklace. What is the present situation or the state that man is in? To begin with, he is in complete ignorance about the purpose and meaning of his life. The mother states how the vast majority of humanity is totally unaware of the reason of man's physical existence upon earth. She explains how very few ask themselves this question about the meaning of life even once. This results in confusion and suffering due to ignorance. One doesn't even think of thinking about it. It doesn't ever occur to a human being to think about it. One lives day to day and through the events of each day. We just pass through the events as it comes. When one is young, one thinks of playing or eating or learning, and later, when we grow up, It is about the circumstances of life. The idea of asking comes to some only when they are facing a catastrophe or during extreme difficult situations. We have experienced, all of us have experienced this, that we start questioning, we start searching for answers when we are in a crisis. Then the search to know begins. It is the ignorance and egoism that one must conquer to no longer suffer. Instead of seeking, but strangely what happens is, instead of seeking answers or trying to make it better, make the situation better and resolve the problem that one is facing, one runs away, escapes from it, from where the problem doesn't present itself any longer. So we try to just evade the situation, we just avoid it, we just run away. As is described in Savitri about man's state of ignorance. He is ignorant of the meaning of his life. He is ignorant of his high and splendid fate. He knows not his own greatness, nor his aim. He has forgotten why he has come and whence. His life is an episode in a meaningless tale. So only when man goes through a crisis, he questions, why is it all and wherefore are we here? What need had the soul of ignorance and tears? Whence rose the call for sorrow and for pain? Or all came helplessly without a cause? The mother speaks of 4 categories of human beings. The first are those who live for themselves and act accordingly. The vast majority, like all of us, we live in this frame of mind. This is what Sri Aurobindo defines as the little life, which is the dominant perspective of the vast majority of humans, whom he calls as economic barbarians. Their dominant characteristic is to possess and control everything within his reach. Only the economic value matters. In Savitri, man is likened to an animal limited by its feeding space. It knew not the immortal in its house. It had no greater, deeper cause to live. A little joy and knowledge satisfied this little being, tied into a knot. Such a life, although enjoyable for a while, will inevitably lead to failure, frustration and pain. There is a long description in Book 2, Canto 10 of the 3 kinds of the gunas of the mind. The tamasic, rajasic and sattvic. Sri Aurobindo clarifies in detail how they color man's mind and how life is bound by their influence. So, as it describes, either she is tamasic, where she is a slave of a fixed mass of absolute rules, or rajasic, when she turns into a huge chameleon, golden, blue and red, to snap up insect joys, its favorite food, which takes fortuitous gains as safe results. Or it is sattvic, when reason, the strongest, wisest of the troll-like 3. But mostly she is still ignorant of all but her own seeking mind. Although to save the world from ignorance she came. Man believes that he is free and runs his own life. But in reality, he is besotted with powers and unseen world energies which act on him He is moved by the forces of nature. He is like a puppet moved by these energies which pull him downwards and rebel against the higher. The conscious doll is pushed 100 ways and feels the push, but not the hands that drive. But one wonders, to whom our figure selves are marionettes? Sri Aurobindo describes them as agents of darkness imitating light. They emerge from our ego self and design the hues of littleness, design the trivial tragedy, and they set the mosaic of life's comedy. These are the unwise prompters, he says, and illusion makers of man's ignorant heart. Such actions are what creates our fate and destiny. All is set as a little drama on a petty stage. One is reminded of Shakespeare's lines. Sri Aurobindo analyzes in the synthesis of yoga how existence and our psychological movements of the lower nature of mind, life and body, are the interaction of these qualitative powers. The large part of humanity lives in the domain of the tamasic and rajasic. He describes tamas as blindness and unconsciousness and incapacity and unintelligence, sloth and indolence and inactivity and mechanical routine, and the mind's torpor and life's sleep and the soul's slumber. He proclaims how at the heart of this inert impotence is the principle of ignorance, he says. Man lives day to day and does not know what the future holds for him. Ignorant and limited in his vision, failing to decipher the purpose of living. He wants to be confined to a routine as it feels secure in its familiarity. Man labors for the hour and not for eternity, only moving from minute to brief minute lives. The majority of people, even intellectuals, are perfectly happy being busy in their own petty little lives, in their bits of progress, and have no interest to be anything else or engage in something greater than their regular works. From SAVITRI. Absorbed in a routine of daily acts, our eyes are fixed on an external scene. We hear the crash of the wheels of circumstance and wonder at the hidden cause of things. Following this first category of life, the mother speaks of the second category of human beings who shape their life around the love of another human being. The way of passion and action and the thirst of desire is the mode of rajas. Human beings are full of desire but do not show it. We don't express the need of wanting something, maybe are even ashamed to acknowledge it to ourselves. But anything that we find pretty, we desire to possess. The irony is that once we get it, and I think this has been the experience of all of us, is that we don't even look at it again. It is very rarely that it continues and sustains our interest, as is illustrated in SAVITRI. A burden of transient gains weighs down her steps, and hardly under that load can she advance. But the hours cry to her. She travels on. passing from thought to thought, from want to want. Her greatest progress is a deepened need. The drama of struggle and change, victory and defeat, joy and suffering, hope and disappointment, makes the many-colored life in which we all take so much pleasure and enjoyment. Man's desire soul wants to fulfill all his enticing fancies and is unable to stop their consummation. Just wants more and more and more. He cannot take delight in life by experiencing the inherent bliss at the heart of everything without, having to possess it. He needs to suffer the pangs of attachment. We human beings lead a strange life. We are blind to the potential that actually life holds for us. We are in love with our smallness, our pettiness, our limitations, and we find comfort in our selfishness. We are afraid and we don't like change, which actually enables us to develop ourselves. Instead, we cling to our old habits, our mindsets, our prejudices, but at the same time wish for better conditions of life, holding on to the old kind of state of consciousness. We desire growth, but make the wrong choices and opt for what makes us to decline. Human beings are full of a sense of vanity and self-importance about their own work and life, slaves to desires and their petty ego. We can say it's a lot of movement without actually any motion. These lines of Savitri aptly discloses. There was a voice of busy interchange, a marketplace of trivial thoughts and acts, a life soon spent, a mind, the body's slave. Here seen the brilliant crown of nature's work, and tiny egos took the world as means to sate a while dwarf lusts and brief desires. There is an inherent contradiction in our life. We are a riddle of opposites. The divine bliss can be experienced only in its absolute limitations in human life. We cannot stomach too much of happiness. We find there's something, probably something is going wrong. We prefer our life to be sprinkled with a bit of sorrow and pain, just like what we watch on the TV as, the episodes and serials. We want drama, we want happiness, we want pain, we want sorrow all together at the same time. So we enjoy sensation and drama. A life which is peaceful is generally considered very boring. That is the truth of the matter. As is stated in Savitri, freedom he asks, but needs to live in bonds. He has need of darkness to perceive some light, and need of grief to feel a little bliss. The experience when we see a lot of light and glare, sometimes things are not very clear. So we need a little bit of shadow to have a sense of depth and perspective. So that is what the lights try to explain. So even given the state of a happy situation or a happy life, we are never satisfied and are perpetually restless for more. We feel that it can get better and better. Why not? We want something better than what we experience today. We constantly feel that there is something wrong, something missing. Our craving is never satiated. Tired soon of too much joy and happiness, she needs the spur of pleasure and of pain, and the native taste of suffering and unrest. She strains for an end that never can she win, a world that ever seeks for something missed, hunting for a joy that earth has failed to keep. Just as these blind passions overwhelm our senses, knowledge serves only the common bodily and emotional needs of man, what we call the physical mind, physical vital mind. Instead of being the master, that is, instead of being master over our senses, he has small aims. The human beings have very small aims with a narrow scope, which serves only himself and his interests, and is preoccupied with very ordinary, transient things, things which are really not important in life. As is described in Savitri, thought's apex outreach is only at the service and fails to take wisdom's flight. His knowledge dwells in the house of ignorance. Time has in none to turn his eyes within. That is what we say, we don't have time for more important, deeper spiritual things in life. We have all the time for things which are temporary and not important. So, although Rajas brings with it activity and energy and the power to overcome, it moves in the half-lights of the ignorance. It moves in false knowledge of attachment and pain, disappointed desire, or grief of loss and failure. His being was formed to play a trivial part in a little drama on a petty stage, is written in Savitri. In the play of life, man is caught in the master knots of ego and desire and of dualities and the play of all the gunas. The ego does help in the formation of one's personality, but as long as this sense of the I, the separate being, seeks to dominate, seeks to outshine, always seeks to come to the front, to aggrandize, the division in consciousness leads to a limitation of consciousness in the body and the mind. This results in man committing wrong acts. Our conscious life obeys the inconscious laws. To ignorant purposes and blind desires, our hearts are moved by an ambiguous force. Sri Aurobindo accurately analyzes how human beings have, made evil a relief from spurious good, he says. Man is attracted, is drawn to evil instead of the good. But we must remember that good never results from evil acts. So let's not justify that. Justify the wrongdoings or the evil acts that sometimes we indulge in. Because love and delight end, and that's when love and delight can end in hate and pain. He described joy nurtured tears and good are evil proved. But never out of evil one plucked good. Love ended early in hate, delight killed with pain. Truth into falsity grew, and death ruled life. Falsehood comes under the garb of truth, with the very voice of God, he says. Truth is exiled as we hug our limits to feel safe, as we call it, as like a comfort zone, that's what we refer to it as. And we are totally in love with that kind of a condition of life, the comfort zones that we are all very, very happy to indulge in, to kind of sit back into. And also we are comfortable with the chaos around us. We equate worst ill with highest good, and evil and misery. We accept it as our natural state. We are okay to suffer. That is okay with us. Suffer the consequences of what our relationships, what our human attachments of heart and flesh, bring to us. But we will not exercise choice for that which actually, empowers us with a sense of freedom. The spiritual seeking, we don't make choice for spiritual seeking. These verses in Savitri elaborates how. Error is a comrade of our mortal thought, and falsehood lurks in the deep bosom of truth. Since poison with its vivid flowers of joy, or leaves a red scar burnt across the soul, virtue is a grey bondage and a cowl. In fact, only by suffering, life grew colorful. That is the beautiful line that describes our state of affairs. As it needed this spice of pain, the salt of tears. That is, we need the life that we live, we need the spice of pain and the salt of tears. Sri Aurobindo aptly cites the analogy of how just as light hurts the heart of darkness, when in the early morning, somebody comes and switches the light on and we're asleep. We don't like it. We just kind of, close our eyes, shut our eyes, So we run away. Similarly, we run away from that which is good and beautiful, from true happiness, like a clawing sweet. The suffering of man is a result of selfishness and egoism. It comes from a feeling that one's rights have been violated and that one has been deprived of one's needs. The other reason is due to the pain of, separation, caused by attachment. And how does Savitri describe this state? Truth was exiled lest she should dare to speak and hurt the heart of darkness with her light, or bring her pride of knowledge to blasphemy, the settled anarchy of established things. We want things to be as they are, the status quo. We want to maintain the status quo. Man thinks of himself all the time, referring everything to himself, governed simply by his own little person, placing himself in the center and trying to organize the entire universe, including God, around himself as the most important thing. We are bound by ego, which makes us befriend falsehood and mistake it to be truth. This is happening all the time. Half-truths, and we kind of believe it to be the ultimate truths. And then we legitimize our actions, which are connected to the ego and to the falsehood. We label it as practical and real. Typically, we indulge in exactly the same things as we would criticize and persecute in others. I'm sure again this is a very common experience with all of us. It forces back to the beast the human falls, is written in Savitri. The divine element within us, the God spark, the soul is forfeited, and only a mind and body live to die. But inherent at the very heart of man's restlessness is life's cry to outgrow itself. It's reaching out for fulfillment. There is in man a sense of striving towards perfection. So the evolution of consciousness in man is actually the propeller of progress. The will to conquer and have, to seize and keep, to enlarge life's room and scope and pleasure's range, to battle and overcome and make one's own, the hope to mix one's joy with others' joy, a yearning to possess and be possessed, to enjoy and be enjoyed, to feel, to live. These are the lines from Savitri. We describe that state. Man has the potential to self-exceed all his limitations, which haunts her miseries, and to forfeit the ignorance fathering his being. We can and we need to free ourselves from pettier cares. This is not what we are or all our world is stated in Savitri. We are greater than our thoughts, and sometimes earth unveils that vision here. In Book 3, Canto 4, there runs a long fitting description of man's dilemma, when the Divine Presence cautions sage Ashwapati about him being all alone in his spiritual journey. Life of man is an enigma. He struggles in vain to change his life or the world. He is a link between the demigod and the beast, as is described in Savitri. He is caught midst the lower and the higher realms of being, pulled downwards, but his gaze is Godwards. In the Life Divine, Sri Aurobindo expounds how the whole crux and difficulty of human life lies in the fact that man's mental consciousness, working as a mental force, has not knowledge of its universality or even of the totality of his being. That which he has become is out of harmony both with what the world of his habitation is and what he himself should be and is to be. Therefore, man is subject to these contradictions of the secret truth of things. Sri Aurobindo writes in Savitri, assigned to meet the cosmic mystery in the dumb figure of a material world, his passport of entry falls and his personage. He is compelled to be what he is not. He obeys the inconscience he had come to rule and sinks in matter to fulfill his soul. Sri Aurobindo cites three reasons for the difficulties which arise from man's imperfect poise of consciousness. The first is that he is aware of only a small part of his being and hence lives physically, emotionally and intellectually only on the surface. Secondly, that man is separated in his mind, his life, his body from the universal and thus incapable of knowing his fellow creatures. And third, the difficulty is due to the division between force and consciousness in the evolutionary existence, he says. He explains how there ensues a constant conflict between the demands of the mind, life and the body. This, he says, is the war of our members, which the mind cannot satisfactorily resolve because it has to deal with the problem insoluble to it, the aspiration of an immortal being in a mortal life and body. The mother too clarifies, the human individual is a very complex being. He is composed of innumerable elements. each one of which is an independent entity and has almost a personality. Not only so, the most contradictory elements are housed together. In the lines of Savitri, his spirit and his members are at war. His heights break off too low to reach the skies. Life's struggle goes on. But as Sri Aurobindo states, it is not a punishment of a fall, as sometimes is considered in some religions, but the conditions of a progress. They are the first elements of the work he has to fulfill, the price that he has to pay for the crown he hopes to win. There is no end or none can yet be seen. Although defeated, life must struggle on. His failure is not failure whom God leads. Through all the slow, mysterious march goes on. Man learns by committing mistakes. They are the necessary experiences to dispel the delusion of superficial knowledge and to start seeking the Spirit. The tragic part is that this mortal creature is his own worst foe, as is written in Savitri. But the Spirit rises mightier by defeat. Its godlike wings grow wider with each fall, is also written in Savitri. If man takes this opportunity to evolve from the fall, that he can really step up, grow into the third stage of his life, as the mother mentions. Then, out of earth's heavy smallness we must break. We must search our nature with spiritual fire. An insect crawl preludes our glorious flight. Our human state cradles the future God. Our mortal frailty, an immortal force. I like to read it. An insect crawl preludes our glorious flight. Our human state cradles the future God. Our mortal frailty, an immortal force. So if man aspires to transmute, to overcome, to overgrow, to evolve out of his present nature into a higher state of consciousness, he needs to grow out from the action of the two inferior gunas of the tamas and the rajas. The mode of sattva is the more enlightened way, directed to truth, goodness and beauty. It brings right understanding, right equilibrium, right order. Its temperament is the bright clearness of knowledge and a lucent warmth, sympathy and closeness. He must seek to know himself, all about his inner domains, how they function, why are they in conflict, what is the point of harmony in them, to become master of himself. And man must seek to know matter, life and mind in order to become the master of the world. That awareness has to come to him. When the dominant guna in man is that of sattva, he can consecrate his love for humanity and become useful to all others other than purely, himself and to his near and dear. And he can become useful to others without calculation or personal gain. This is the third kind of human beings, according to the mother, before finally giving themselves entirely to the divine and live only for Him and through Him, which is the fourth, the highest stage. One of Savitri's many magnificent passages describing man's higher possibilities of growth makes part of Book 4, Canto 3. I'm sure many of us find in these our favorite lines. O force-compelled, fate-driven, earth-born race, O petty adventurers in an infinite world and prisoners of a dwarf humanity, how long will you tread these circling tracks of mind around your little self and petty things? But not for a changeless littleness were you meant, not for vain repetition were you built. Out of the immortal substance you were made, your actions can be swift, revealing steps. Your life, a changeful mold for growing gods. When we further evolve into this highest level of consciousness, highest level of our being, we are in touch with the inner light and raise ourselves to a greater life. We begin to feel the presence in the outer forms around us. The divine seed within begins to blossom and rises into an ardent aspiration for the Supreme. All the world's possibilities in man are awaiting as the tree waits in its seeds. His past lives in him. It drives his future space. His presence acts, fashion his coming fate. Life has a goal. There is a progressive evolution which leads us to that goal. Once the individual becomes aware of the goal, he begins to thrill and resonate to the higher call, and it opens up the glory and sublime experiences. This is beautifully described in Savitri. This greater life is enamored of the unseen. It calls to some highest light beyond its reach. It can feel the silence that absolves the soul. It feels a savior touch, a ray divine. Beauty and good and truth its godheads are. If we triumph over our lower nature, break from the bondage of our ego, and seek to enlighten ourselves, the assurance and the promise is declared by the Divine Mother. All would change, all would become easy if man could once consent to be spiritualized, says the Mother. This is the assurance of the resolution to all human problems. A seer, a strong creator is within. A greater destiny waits you in your front. Yet shall the Godhead grow within your hearts. The human predicament thus will be resolved.